Hi, everyone. Welcome to the first block of the Florida Race Equity Challenge, Assessing Personal Perspectives. Today's webinar is Swords and Shields, a discussion of power, privilege, and opportunity. My name is Natalie Steiner, and I'll be your moderator for today. To officially launch the Florida Race Equity Challenge, I'd like to begin by inviting DJJ's Secretary, Simone Marstiller, to offer some opening remarks.
Well, thank you, Natalie, and good morning, everybody. I am Simone Marstiller, the Secretary of Florida's Department of Juvenile Justice, and I am so very excited to have you all not here with us. I wish you could be, but to have you all online and ready to have some very substantive discussions about the effect of our juvenile justice system on our minority youth and what we can do to bring down those numbers. Now, I'm sure you all know that this program, which will ensue over the next several months, a lot of time and planning went into this, and we did it before, obviously, the George Floyd situation occurred, and before all of the protests and whatnot that we're seeing right now. But if there were a better time for us to have this challenge and have these conversations, I can't imagine a better time. Now is the time for all of us to take a good hard look at how we do what we do inside and outside, frankly, the juvenile justice system when it comes to how we affect our minority youth. These are going to be hard conversations to have. You're going to hear some difficult things, no question about it. But our responsibility as the men and women who educate, rehabilitate, give therapies to the children in our juvenile justice system, we need to make sure, each and every one of us, in and of ourselves, that when we are at a decision point about what to do with a child that we're faced with, we need to make sure in and of ourselves that our decision making isn't biased. We need to be sure that we understand that every child, all of these children, are good. They're good. I firmly believe that. I firmly believe that when children get into criminal activity, there's a whole lot of stuff that has happened to those children to get them to that point. We have right now, with this Race Equity Challenge, the best opportunity to individually and collectively challenge ourselves, challenge the system, and make positive steps to making it better, more equitable, more efficient, more caring, and understanding that what we are trying to accomplish is to improve the lives of the children that we serve. So again, I say, I'm excited about this challenge. I am excited, quite frankly, that we are doing it right now, because we all have a unique opportunity to finally put our money and our actions where our mouths have been for the longest time. So with that, Natalie, let me say thank you again and welcome to everybody. And Natalie, I will turn it over to you to take it from here.
Thank you so much, Secretary Marstiller, and I speak for everyone when I say we really do appreciate your support. As we transition to our keynote speaker, I'd like to explain some technical things to everyone. All of our audience members will be muted for today's webinar. If you take a look at the top right corner of your screen, you'll see a control panel with a red arrow button at the top. If you click that arrow, the full control panel will pop out and you'll see a chat box where you can submit any questions for today's speaker or technical issues to our staff. We will facilitate any questions that we have time for today, and any additional questions will be covered during our podcast, The Race for a Change with LaTanya Taylor. With that being said, it is my pleasure to introduce our speaker to everyone today. Adam Foss is a former Assistant District Attorney of the Suffolk County District Attorney's Office in Boston, Massachusetts. Mr. Foss has been recognized by the Mandela Foundation as Changemaker of the Year. He is a senior visiting fellow at Harvard Law School and has been awarded Prosecutor of the Year by the Massachusetts Bar Association. His 2016 TED Talk on criminal justice reform has been viewed over 2 million times. He is the founder and executive director of Prosecutor Impact, a nonprofit that develops training and curriculum for prosecutors to reframe their role in the criminal justice system. Thank you for being with us today, Adam.
Thank you for having me. It's so wonderful being here with your team and with all of the people that I can't see because we're in a virtual world, but I know something about because you choose to wake up every single day and serve the people, the youngest people who need our help the most. And for that, I give you all of my honor and respect and appreciation for what I think is one of the hardest jobs that a person can have. Madam Secretary, Minnie, Ash, and Natalie, thank you for all of the work that you've put in to creating this conference. This is a obviously relevant and poignant time to be talking about these issues, but I hope that we can do so in the spirit of recognizing that there is progress that we can make, that we have a long way to go to being the country that we believe ourselves to be and tell ourselves that we are, and the men and women who choose to go and work on the front lines every single day have the opportunity to create that reality. But we have to do the hard thing first. We have to get uncomfortable. And picking up on Madam Secretary's comments, this is going to be an uncomfortable talk for some of you because the things that I will talk about will be all too familiar and in some ways triggering, and I want to apologize for that ahead of time. For others of you, because this might be the first time that you've had a conversation about race or because you've been challenged this way, some of you are going to disagree with many of the things that I say, and some of you are going to maybe not like some of the things that I say. But I'm going to ask you for something for the next 40 minutes, which is just to sit in that discomfort. Just sit in the discomfort. Don't do the things that we do as human beings naturally when we are uncomfortable. Don't look to do something else. Don't look at your phone. Don't look for the exit. And please don't try to create arguments to rebut what I'm asking you in this challenge. Just please sit in the discomfort. Because to leave discomfort is a privilege, and it's a privilege that many of the young people that we come into contact with in the juvenile justice system do not get to have. They wake up uncomfortable, they go to school uncomfortable, they're uncomfortable at school, on the way home from school they're uncomfortable, at home they're uncomfortable, and that discomfort is toxic, and it happens to them every single day, and it's a lot of the reasons that we see them in our systems. And so for them, I'm just asking that for the next 40 minutes we sit in that discomfort because again, it is a privilege not to have it. The other reason I'm asking you to sit in your discomfort is the same reason that I would ask you to sit in it if I was your personal trainer or if I was trying to teach you a new language. Nothing happens with human beings that is net positive if we don't get a little bit uncomfortable. If you're trying to lose weight, if you're trying to build muscle, if you're trying to learn something new, it comes with work and discipline and yes, some discomfort. So please just sit in it and it'll be over soon. And to start this conversation, this uncomfortable conversation, I'm actually going to start by talking about my travel habits. But before I do, I want to acknowledge and recognize all of the young people who we've lost. We've lost to incarceration, we've lost to the graveyard, we've lost because their trust in us as adults running systems is gone. I am an avid traveler for work. Before coronavirus hit, over the last 3 years, I've had about two and a half million miles in the sky. And when you travel that much, you achieve something that we're all seeking, which is status. And by the time coronavirus hit, I was like triple, quadruple platinum status on all the airlines. which brings with it another set of privileges. One of them is that you get to get on the plane whenever you want. Another is that you can sit wherever you want. And I am an aisle person, and I like to be on the plane first. I have not yet broken through the status where I can sit in first class. Once in a while I get lucky, but most of the time I'm sitting in an aisle seat. And about 7 months ago now, I was sitting in my aisle seat on the airplane, and as the aisle person, you have two responsibilities. One, when people need to get in the row, you stand up, and when people need to get out of the row, you stand up. Those are your responsibilities. And so as the aisle person, I was sitting there, and a young woman came up to me and she said, "Excuse me, I'm sitting in the window." And I said, "Okay, hello." And I stood up, and she sat down, and I went back to reading my book. And a few minutes later, a young man came and he said, I'm sitting in the middle seat. And I said, "Oh, that sucks. But okay." So I stood up and he sat down, and I looked across the row. And as I was looking at them and they were looking at me, I don't know if they were thinking the same thing that I was, but I couldn't stop thinking, like, man, this is the first time that I've sat next to two black strangers on an airplane. And in fact, I can't remember the last time I sat next to a black person in first class. And I definitely can't remember the last time that when I got to the front of the plane, I saw a black pilot standing there. And it had me thinking about all of these places that I find myself in privilege, power, and opportunity, where I don't see people who look like me. And I really started to like focus and think about all of those times and all of those spaces. You see, in the last 4 years, I've had the opportunity to speak at about 100 colleges, grad schools, law schools, and medical schools. And when I'm standing in those classrooms speaking to auditoriums of people, when I look out, I see very few faces that look like me. In fact, I haven't gone to a school that has an African American population of 5% or greater. I've had the opportunity to speak at some of the best conferences that this planet has to offer. TED, Davos, Skoll, you name it. I've been there standing on those stages looking out at audiences. And again, when I'm looking for faces that look like me, typically the only people I see are the musical talent. I've had the opportunity to sit in some of the Fortune 100 companies, C-suite offices, sitting across from the Mark Zuckerbergs and the Bill Gateses and the Jeff Bezoses. And when I look around those offices where millions of dollars are being exchanged every day, when I look around for people who look like me, it's typically the people who are serving the coffee or taking out the trash. And when I'm in those spaces, I'm forced to ask myself, like, is everybody in here just that much smarter and more articulate and more creative and more ambitious, more driven than people who look like me, or something else going on here? And of course, I don't have to think too hard about that question, because I spend the rest of my time in places where I see lots of people who look like me. And most of the time, those are not places of privilege, power, and opportunities. Those are places of despair. In jails and prisons, in juvenile detention facilities, in homeless shelters, in domestic violence shelters, impoverished neighborhoods, in juvenile detention facilities. And when I find myself in those places, I have to ask myself, is there a genetic difference between me and all of these other folks who I see in these places of power, privilege, and opportunity that only allows for my pathway in life to go to these places of despair, or is something else happening here? And we know the answer to that question as well. There's just something else happening. And we have lots of words for it, but I'll say it out loud. It is racism. And when I think about being in those spaces and looking around, I think about my legacy. Like, what are people in the future going to be thinking about me and being in this space and having this platform? What are they going to say about my contribution in life? And the only way that I can think about that is think to myself about how we look at people who treated people look like me 50 years ago in this country. And the only way that I can do that is look at the images that we have of the way that people were treated like me 50 years ago in this country. And when I look at the images, I think about the images of 4 little girls who went into a Sunday school one day and didn't walk out again because somebody threw a pipe bomb in their basement of their church, and nothing happened for decades. I think about the images of a 15-year-old boy who was beaten so badly that his mother had the wherewithal to keep his casket open during his funeral, so the rest of the country could see what the Deep South had done to her son. I think about the images of 3 young men hanging from trees lit on fire in the middle of a public square in a major city in the 1960s. And when I think about those images, of course I'm thinking about those 4 little girls. Of course I'm thinking about Emmett Till. Of course I'm thinking about those 3 young men. But what really gets me about those images are all of the people standing around the periphery watching it happen. And of course I can identify the bad apples in those pictures, but then there's a bunch of people who are just standing there letting it happen. And I find myself shouting at the images like, what are you doing? Why are you just standing there? Why are you letting this happen? I would have done something. Why aren't you doing something? But then I think about my role in this system and how often I've stood on the sidelines. And I ask myself, am I any better than those people in the pictures? Because I've stood on the sidelines of a tremendous human and civil rights crisis that we know as mass incarceration. Because right now, today, there are 2.3 million people in jail or prison. Another 5 million people, one misstep away from adding to that larger aggregate number. Despite the fact that people who look like me only make up about 12% of our national population, we're pushing about 50% of the carceral population. 1 in 4 Americans has a criminal record. That's 70 million of us out here with a scarlet letter on our chest that says because we are arrested and convicted, somehow we are less valuable to society because of this scarlet letter. And we all know about our devastating recidivism rate. 70% of people who have been released from prison will return within the next 3 years, all at a cost of billions, if not trillions of dollars of our future. And this isn't just a criminal justice issue. These disparities show up at every health and educational and cultural and social metric that you possibly think of. The leading cause of death of Black men in this country, 18 to 35 years old, is handgun homicide. That is not true of any other people on any other place on this planet, except here and in the islands that border us in the Caribbean. It causes so much death, it causes more death than the next 9 leading causes of death combined for that same age group. I ask you, do you think that when I was born, somehow I was born with a genetic deficiency that made it more likely that I pick up a handgun and shoot other people that look like me, or is something else happening? There's a place on this planet where a Black woman is 12 times more likely to die than a white woman during childbirth. It is not in sub-Saharan Africa. It is not in the Caribbean. It is in Manhattan. Black women and white women experience breast cancer rates. It's the exact same incidence rates, but Black women are twice as likely to die from it. Why? Because when Black women woke up this morning, they cared half as much about their bodies as white women, or is something else happening? The city that I grew up in, Boston, Massachusetts, the average household worth of white families in Boston is $250,000 a year and increasing. The average household worth of Black families in Boston is $8 and decreasing. Why? Because when the opportunity came for people to come home for World War II and buy houses and inherit that wealth and transfer that wealth to children to build intergenerational wealth, that Black people just didn't want to? Or something else happening here? There are more segregated schools in this country today than there were on the evening of Brown versus Board of Education. There are more people under carceral control in this country today than there were slaves on the eve of the Civil War. And if I have to just draw the finest point on it that I possibly can, researchers estimate that over the 400 years of the transatlantic slave trade, more than 12 million Africans were captured, enslaved, and killed. Last year, 13 million people went through our jails. And what did we get for it? A bloated criminal justice system and trust that is driving people out into the streets all over the world saying we want something different. This is our moment. This is our legacy moment. The people who fund us to go to work are telling us something's got to give. And we have a choice today to decide whether we agree with them or we're going to hang on to this history and tradition that we've been so wedded to and so conditioned to believe is the best that we can do. We need a new civil rights movement. I don't know why the last one stopped. A lot of people blame the inertia and a lack of leadership. We're waiting for the next Malcolm. We're waiting for the next Martin. We're waiting for the next Rosa. Someone, anyone to come and take us to the promised land, but it doesn't come. And every day that we wait, millions more of us are arrested. Thousands more of us are incarcerated. Thousands of us die. We cannot wait any longer. The good news is, and there is good news, the reason that I've been working with Minnie and Natalie and Ash and the secretary for over a year now to be here is because one, I love the people who choose to do this job, but two, I fundamentally believe from the fiber of my being that somewhere out there on this call are the new civil rights leaders of our time. I'll tell you what I mean in a minute. When I was 19 years old, I remember standing across from a police officer, handing him thousands of dollars of cash that I had wadded up in my bedroom, stuffed up into the wall. And I remember handing him the little scraps of marijuana that I'd left over from the pounds that I was trafficking between Philadelphia and Boston. And I remember looking at him and him looking at me and me registering the look of his face of one of contempt, disgust, and frustration that I had become a statistic. And I remember looking at him and thinking to myself like, oh man, I'm in trouble. But despite the fact that I was a black man in the United States of America standing across from a police officer having just been caught drug trafficking in the 1990s war on drugs, here's what trouble looked like to me. My mom and dad are going to be really mad. They might take away my brand new Razr cell phone. They might take away the pickup truck that I bought for myself with my 17th birthday money. And I remember the other kid who got caught on campus selling weed. He had to move all the way across campus. That's what trouble looked like to me. But if I had been anywhere else at any other time, here's what trouble should have looked like to me. What I had done was commit a federal crime. I did not know that. I knew that I had committed a bunch of broke a bunch of state laws, but I didn't know that one of them carried with it a 10-year minimum mandatory sentence. And because of that 10-year minimum mandatory sentence, the likelihood I pled out to that case was about 100%. And in pleading out to that case, I would have given myself the moniker convicted drug felon. And in doing so, I would have actually deprived myself of the access to the things that actually keep us safe. The access to housing, the access to employment, the access to education, the access to transportation, the access to healthcare, the access to mental health care and addiction treatment. And in depriving myself of those things, the likelihood I commit another crime actually went up, not down. And each time I re-engaged with the criminal justice system, the likelihood I commit a further more serious crime went up, not down, until some point I might have victimized another person, at which point the government would have had to send me to prison for double-digit decades, and I never would have had the opportunity to be here. I didn't realize how many people fell down this rabbit hole that I was standing on the edge of every single year and depriving us of the ability to meet them. I didn't know how easily that police officer, if he wanted to, could have pushed me over the edge of that rabbit hole, and down it I would have fallen, forever disappearing and never having the opportunity to meet any of you. But I'm not. I'm here. In fact, I got to go back to college. I graduated from college. I went out into the workforce. I worked for 3 years. I came out of the workforce. I went to law school. I went to law school for 3 years. I came out of law school. I went to one of the most prestigious DA's offices in the country. I worked there for 9 years and had a wildly decorated career. So decorated, in fact, that one day John Legend picked up the phone, called me and said, hey, man, do you want to do a TED Talk? And I was like, hell yeah, John Legend. I would love to do a TED Talk. Did a TED Talk. I blew up on the internet, and for the last 4 years, I've been traveling the country and the world with every celebrity and artist and athlete and activist you could possibly think of, talking about ways that we can improve our justice system. In the fall of 2015, I got to sit with the 44th president of the United States of America in his house and tell him what I thought of his criminal justice policy. Last summer, I got to sit in Oprah Winfrey's house and let Oprah tell me how dope she thought I was. In the last year, I've learned that I have a children's book, a rap lyric, and a documentary all made about me. And in 2018, Nelson Mandela's family named me the Nelson Mandela Changemaker of the Year. Let me be clear. I do not tell you any of those things to humble brag or to name drop. I tell you them only to make this point, that none of that happens. None of that happens if I don't win the lottery. Because the police officer who pulled me over in my driveway. The police officer who pulled me over was a white man. The police officer who pulled me over was my dad. And after he took me down to the station and he sat me in a cell for a little while to teach me a lesson, he took me home and he loved me. Just like he loved me every time I screwed up after that. Just like somebody loved you every time that you screwed up before you got here. Just like maybe we need to love the people who come in contact with our system just a little bit more to show them that we care about them and that their lives matter. The lottery ticket I won did not happen out in that driveway. Nope, it happened many, many years before that. I was born in a violent and impoverished neighborhood. I was immediately orphaned, and I spent the first few months of my life in an orphanage until one day, two lovely people from suburban Boston came and picked me instead of the other kid. I got to go home with them. I grew up in their white working class neighborhood. I went to white working class schools. I had white working class friends, and that shield of privilege protected me from the bottom of that rabbit hole. And the fact that I get to be here and experience all of these things and have done all of these accomplishments, and I get to enjoy all of this because I won the lottery, and the tens of thousands of people that I've met in prisons and in juvenile detention facilities and impoverished neighborhoods don't get to be here because they didn't, drives me crazy. And it should drive you crazy too, because we are missing out on so much talent in the quest of this historic and traditional criminal justice system that we continue to show up to every single day and not ask ourselves, is there something that we can do that's better? We are never going to know what we've missed out on if we don't do a better job of focusing on the people who come into our system. We are never going to know whose talent, whose intellect, whose ambition, whose creativity, and whose drive we missed out on because we judge them by one act or two acts or the worst moment of their life. I didn't realize it at the time, but my father in that moment was handing me a sword and a shield. The shield was that privilege, that's that protection that kept me from the bottom of that rabbit hole. And what I didn't realize at the time was that shield didn't have to just protect me, it could protect anybody that I wanted to with it. Or even better, I could break off pieces of my shield and hand it over to people so they could start to build their own platform. And the sword was for the haters. Because believe it or not, there are some haters out here. There are people who will look me in the face and tell me that I should have gone to prison for selling their kids weed in 1999 on college campus, even though 11 states are now selling weed to whoever they want to and making billions of dollars doing it. There are people who love to talk to me about accountability. You got to hold people accountable. You got to hold people accountable. You got to hold people accountable. But when it's time to have the accountability conversation that I want to have, the one where I can list all of that data and talk about all of these things and then just ask the utterance of the words Black Lives Matter, and people want to come at me with all lives matter, when I want to have the accountability conversation that, yes, this is a wonderful place to live, but can we for a moment just talk that the reason that this is a wonderful place to live is predicated on the enslavement of one people, the genocide of another people, and the subjugation of lots and lots of other people. All of a sudden the accountability conversation goes out the window. People love to ask me about chances. How many chances you're going to give these young people? How many chances you're going to give these young people? How many chances you're going to give these young people? And my question back to them is, how many chances did you get, Chad? Or how many times did you just not get caught? Because that's really what we're talking about, is the difference between who is police and get caught and who's not. The sword was for the haters. And I used my sword and shield thousands of times during my career as a prosecutor. I'm going to tell you about one of those right now. But what I need you to know before I go any further is that your privilege, your power of being here, of being part of this group, of being able to get up and go to this job, the opportunity that you have every single day because of the young people that you meet and the families that are looking to you for help, gives you a sword and a shield too. It is deep down in your pocket right now, and I'm hoping that after this talk, you'll take it out and you'll ask yourself, how am I going to use this thing? And how brave am I going to be? Because oftentimes, the people who need our help the most are the people who require the most courage from us. I'm going to tell you about my one example. I met Stanley for the first time when he was 16 years old. He came to my courtroom for stealing a cell phone. I had gone from prosecuting our high-risk 18 to 25-year-old men for gang crimes, shootings, and stabbings, and realized that by the time I got them when they were 18 and 19 years old, they already had juvenile records, and so I asked to be transferred to the juvenile section, so maybe I could catch them further upstream. And so I went from prosecuting these sort of high-profile cases to prosecuting cell phone stealing. And I'm glad I did, because I got the opportunity to ask young people, like, why are y'all stealing cell phones? What's happening down here? And what I learned was that kids weren't stealing cell phones because they were black or brown or bad, but kids were stealing cell phones because in our neighborhoods, there were electronic stores where they could take a stolen cell phone, hand it over to the counter to an adult who would never ask any questions about where that cell phone came from, and they would hand that kid $80. It was an economy that these young people could participate in, and they were. Because the days of like going to get a paper route or cutting the neighbor's lawn or babysitting the neighbor's kids for these young people are gone. And what were these bad kids doing with the money that they were getting from stealing and selling these cell phones? They were buying pizza and weed and sneakers, the same stuff that your kids are buying. And there I was, Mr. Woke Prosecutor, and I said something like, Stanley, how dare you? And I took that moment to stop and ask myself, how am I going to dispose of this case? And so right now, what I'm going to ask you is how you would dispose of this case. Stanley, 16 years old, first-time offender, steals a cell phone, larceny over $250. Natalie, can we have the poll, please? So go ahead. This is anonymous. Dive in and let us know how you would just resolve that case with the information you have, understanding it's probably want more information. A few more seconds. All right, let's see it. Then we're going to see the results. Everybody wants to see the results. Okay. So I was with the 89% of you. I said something like, Stanley, how dare you? This is bad. This is bad behavior. This is a felony. This could have irreparable damage on the rest of your life. Shame on you. This is bad, bad, bad. I'm going to lock you up if you do this again, but not today. I'm woke. So get out of here. Stanley left. A few months later, Stanley came back into the courtroom, this time not for stealing a cell phone, but for stealing a Vespa. For those of you who are unfamiliar with the Vespa, let's just do a really, really quick lesson on Vespas. Stanley and I actually lived in the same neighborhood of Boston, and our neighborhood, like most neighborhoods outside in major cities, is being rapidly gentrified. And with the gentrifiers comes their gentrifier starter pack. Sign 1 that you have a gentrification problem. French Bulldogs. Sign 2, the fancy grocery store that shows up in the neighborhood. Sign 3, Vespas. The cute little red scooters that the gentrifiers are driving to their tech jobs and taking up our parking spots. What they didn't tell the gentrifiers at the gentrifier store, at the Vespa store, was that these scooters are really easy to hotwire. Red wire, green wire, go. And these young people were stealing Vespas. Why? Not because they were black or brown or poor, but because there were fences that they could drive these things behind where adults would receive them, take the Vespas off the hands of these young people, never ask them where they came from, and give them $200 because those men were going to chop up the vehicle and sell them for parts. It was an economy they could participate in, and they were. So there I was, standing there in front of Stanley, who had just stolen a Vespa, 6 months after I had just given him this rousing speech when I diverted him for the cell phone. And I made a decision on that day again. But first, I want to find out what you would do. Poll, please. All right, you know what to do. He's got an open case. 6 months later, he steals a Vespa. How would you resolve this case? Understanding there's probably lots of other things you want to know. A few more seconds. Let's see it. Okay. So we had some convergent from divergent to probation. I stuck with my divergent decision and I said something like, Stanley, how dare you? This is twice as bad because you have an open case. Shame on you. This is also more expensive. Shame on you. This is another felony. Shame on you. This is bad. I'm going to lock you up. I swear to God, if you do this, I'm going to lock you up. Shame on you. Bad, 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 but not today because I'm woke. I'm going to divert you. Get out of here. And Stanley left. I was doing something that those of us who are certainly adults, but particularly those adults with lots of initials after our last name, we do often, which is why we tell people what we think they should be doing instead of taking every single opportunity to just like stop and listen to what people are telling us, because oftentimes they're not telling us with their words, but they're broadcasting to us loud and clear exactly what it is that they need. Unfortunately, I had the opportunity to ask Stanley those questions about a year later when he came back to my courtroom, this time as a 17-year-old. Over the course of that weekend, Stanley had posed as someone on Craigslist interested in purchasing motorcycles. He convinced two men on Craigslist to drive up to Boston with motorcycles in the back of their pickup trucks. He then convinced those men to pick up him and his accomplice in their neighborhood in Dorchester and then drive them back out to a golf course where they could test drive the motorcycles. And when those men took the motorcycles off their trucks, Stanley's accomplice would raise up his jacket, revealing what appeared to be a firearm. And Stanley told those men to get back into their trucks and leave, and they did. Stanley gone from cell phone stealing to Vespa theft to 2 counts of armed robbery, 2 counts of possession of firearm, 2 counts of assault with a dangerous weapon. One of those charges was a life felony. Stack all 6 on top of each other, there aren't enough numbers in our lexicon to describe the amount of time that Stanley was facing at that point. So I had another decision to make. But before I tell you about the decision that I made, I want to hear about yours. So our last poll. How would you resolve this case? All right. Everybody in? All right. So we see a couple big conversions here. One is probation, but the other clearly is 50% of us are locking Stanley up. And yeah, really terrifying amount of escalation in a short period of time, violence, handguns, 2 really, really upset victims. I completely understand the urge. And in that moment, I had the opportunity to do that as well, to just say, screw it, I'm done. But instead, I took the opportunity to do the thing that I had been negligent in doing this entire time, was just asking Stanley what was going on. How did I miss this? And so I asked for the court officer to remove his hardware, his ankle shackles. And I asked that he be taken out of custody and put into a conference room with me and his attorney. And then I asked him what happened. For those of you who are like, what? You were the prosecutor, you're asking him what happened? Don't worry. this was not an investigatory journey for me. I wasn't trying to get evidence to use against him. In fact, Stanley had done all the work for me. He used his own email address, stanleyvargas98@gmail.com, to set up the Craigslist buys. He then used his own cell phone and his own cell phone number to give those men directions to his house to pick him up. And if that wasn't bad enough, when Stanley got on those motorcycles and was driving them to that chop shop where he traded them in, the same chop shop he took the Vespa, where he got a substantial amount of money, he looked so good that he couldn't help but taking a selfie and posting it on Facebook, date, time, and location, stamping himself at the scene of the crime on the evidence. This was not me conducting an investigation. I literally wanted to know, like, how did we get here? What happened? Stanley didn't tell me about any gang he was trying to jump into. He didn't tell me about any gang he was trying to jump out of. He didn't tell me about some weird international motorcycle stealing ring that we had just missed. Stanley told me about when he was 9 years old and his family emigrated to Boston from the Dominican Republic to give him and his two older brothers a shot at a better life and a better education. Where would you go for that except for Boston? And at 9 years old, how he recognized that his family was making this tremendous sacrifice, cutting off all ties with this island nation that they had only known, to move to a place where they did not speak the language and they were not welcome. And at 9 years old, how he recognized, despite the fact that he'd grown up in the developing country, he'd never seen the kind of violence and poverty and trauma that he did when he moved into the Fidelis projects in Boston. And how that violence and that poverty and that trauma started to seep its way through the cracks in his apartment building and take his family members one by one. First, it came for his oldest brother. His oldest brother, he described to me as someone who's super intelligent and super attractive and super popular. But shortly after moving to the United States, he stopped coming home after school, and then he stopped coming home after curfew, and sometimes he wouldn't come home at all. Stanley would see his older brother out in the street, and he'd be dressed in all nice gear with nice new Jordans, and Stanley didn't understand where the money was coming from until one night the federal government made that very clear when they kicked in their family's apartment door, arrested Stanley's oldest brother, and sent him to federal prison for drug trafficking at the age of 19. The same thing that I had been doing. Stanley then talked about his next oldest brother, Stephen. Stephen and Stanley were very close in age, and they played together all the time in the Dominican Republic. And that continued when they moved to the United States. But as they got older, that roughhousing, that play became violent, and that violence began to manifest in the family, and then at school, and then in the streets. Stanley described his brother as a little off, but told me that his parents were worried about taking him to the doctor to get mental health treatment because their paperwork wasn't in order, and they were afraid that they would get deported if they made too much noise. One afternoon, Stephen was involved in a gang shooting, and he went to prison for double-digit decades at the age of 17. Stanley told me about the feeling he had when he woke up and he found out that his father had disappeared in the middle of the night back to the Dominican Republic, not because he was black or brown or poor, but because he was a broken and ashamed man, that he had exposed his family to what he thought was the American dream, but it turned out to be the American nightmare. Stanley told me about coming home and finding his mother laying on the ground, crying and throwing up, not because she was sad, not because she was sick, but because she was so exhausted from trying to keep everything together. Stanley told me about the feeling that he had putting $4,000 on his mother's table, the $4,000 that he got from stealing those motorcycles, and rubbing her back and saying, everything is going to be okay. I'm never going to let anything happen to you. I love you. And I remember looking back at Stanley and saying, yeah, Stanley, I get that. I understand that. I feel that deeply. I would do anything for my mother. But weren't you afraid? Weren't you afraid of prison? Weren't you afraid of the police? Weren't you afraid of me? I was supposed to send you to prison right now. And Stanley looked at me and he said, is that what you think? Is that what you people think, that when I was out there robbing those men, the thought of prison ever entered my mind? I was worried about my mother dying. I wasn't worried about any prison sentence I might get. Do you think that when my friends put guns in the front of our pants to walk to school, we're thinking at all about the 18 months in the House of Correction you might give us if we get caught with a gun? No. We're thinking about the very real consequence if we get caught out here without a gun. Stanley looked at me and he said, man, the criminal law is for the land of the living. It's for the land of the privileged. We're out here just trying to survive. The best piece of legal education I ever got did not come from the $150,000 piece of paper that sits on the wall in my office. It came from a 17-year-old kid in an orange jumpsuit and handcuffs who was reading at about a 5th grade level. That is the opportunity that we get every single day if we just take a beat and listen to the things that these young people are trying to tell us, and then respond with empathy, kindness, and compassion, regardless of how we judge the thing that they have done. Stanley gave me a gift that day, and I felt obliged to give him one back. So I said, okay, Stanley, I need 2 things from you today. First, I need you to tell me where it is that you want to be, because right now there's one road out of here and it goes to MCI Norfolk for a period of 15 to 20 years. Stanley looked at me and he said, I want to graduate from high school. My family has been sacrificed just so that we can cross the graduation stage. I want to be the first one. And you know what else? I want to play baseball. I'm really good at it. I like it. I like feeling part of a team. But because of my brother's reputation, because of my grades at school, I can't get on the team. I can't play. I just want somebody to help me play. And you know what else? I want to go to college. I see all these people out here in Boston enjoying this neighborhood because they're in college. I want some of that too. And at the end of the day, whether I'm a college graduate or a professional baseball player, I want to buy my mother a house and get her out of the hood. I ask you if that sounds like the life plan of a violent and serial felon that needed to go to prison for the next 20 years of his life that day. I didn't think so either. So I said, number 2, Stanley, I need a list from you of all the things that you need to do to get from where it is that you are right now to where it is that you're going to be. I'm going to write you a list too. I'm the prosecutor. There are certain things that I need from you to get you out from under this. And Stanley wrote his list. It looks something like this. Wake up on time. Go to school every day. Stay in school. Pay attention. Do my homework. Go to practice. Practice hard. Play hard. Be nice to my friends. Be nice to my mom. Stay away from police. Don't be a pain in the ass. Go to bed on time. My list looked remarkably similar, except at the top, number 1, we need to get the victim's stuff back. See, the intervention was happening within hours of the crime, and as a result, we were able to work with Stanley and the Boston Police Department to go and retrieve the motorcycles from the chop shop and give them back to the victims, something that almost never happens in the criminal justice system. Number 2, you're going to apologize, not in the way where 18 months from now, I'm going to read a police report and you're going to stand over there and you're going to say, yeah, I did that. No, you're going to apologize to these men. And if these men don't want to hear from you, I'm going to find you somebody that's been harmed in a similar way, and you're going to apologize to them, because I need you to understand the depth of harm that you created was not the taking of those motorcycles. It was the taking of their sense of safety. And I need you to understand that so you don't do it again. But I also need you to understand that you are not the worst thing that you have ever done. And you're not going to just apologize with your words. You're going to apologize with your actions. You're going to do community service every single day until your hands bleed. And I'm not talking about picking up trash on the side of the road with the OGs. I'm talking about getting a volunteer opportunity somewhere that you can put on a resume and be proud of. I'm going to get accountability out of you by making you work for it, not by sitting you in a cell somewhere and letting you rot and talk about how you got done or how you caught a case or how you got screwed over. But don't worry, there's going to be an adult that loves you, that cares about you, that wants to see you succeed. I'm going to get you there. Anytime that there's an academic lecture, or a book reading, or a documentary screening that I want you to go to, don't worry, you're going to go, but I'm going to get you there. There's going to be an adult that loves you there, that wants to see you succeed. You're going to write, you're going to journal, you're going to reflect, you're going to essay, you're going to talk to me about this case, because I need you to understand, Stanley, how close you were to the edge of a rabbit hole. But for today, you're going to leave. And the next time that I see you again will be when you're walking across your high school graduation stage. I'll hand you I will give you my hand. I will shake your hand and say, congratulations, Stanley Vargas, your case is over. But for now, you're going to go home. And Stanley left. We have the opportunity to do that every single day in lots and lots of ways. Not just when it's the hardest case, but when people start showing up in our child welfare and our juvenile justice systems at a really young age. And I know this isn't a disparagement of anybody who's out there. I know that we've been working and we've been offering chances to kids and we've been offering all these things. What I'm saying to you is we haven't had the right resources or tools or conversations to do the good work that we need to do. And we have that opportunity starting today, right now. Because what I learned from Stanley and all of the tens of thousands of other people that I've had the opportunity to spend my time with, the ones that I swore an oath to serve, what I've learned from them is like Stanley and lots of the young men who are sitting in prison doing life sentences right now, their crimes didn't start the day that they picked up a handgun and went and shot somebody or robbed somebody. They started long, long before that, and they were telling us that this was going to happen. Because we know now that babies who are conceived to mothers who are living in environments of toxic stress, aka poverty, are inheriting that toxic stress as they develop. Researchers show that young people who are conceived and are incubated in a place of toxic stress respond different to trauma than kids who are not. Those are young, unborn children telling us, if you put your resources down here, if you use your sword and your shield down here, you might save me from going to prison, but we don't, we wait. Those children then go and they're born into those communities and they start suffering that toxic stress acutely. We call them adverse childhood experiences. I'm sure that in your time here, you will learn all about adverse childhood experiences. But for now, what all you need to know is the more of them that you have, the harder that life is for you, the worse outcomes that you have. In fact, in 2016, the Massachusetts Department of Youth Services surveyed all of their children in their custody, and they learned that 75% of them had on average 3 interactions with the child welfare system before the age of 3. 75% of the kids locked up in Massachusetts in 2016 had on average 3 interactions with the child welfare system before the age of 3 for abuse, neglect, and malnutrition. Those little kids telling us, hey, if you put your resources down here, if you use your sword and your shield down here, you might save me from going to prison, but we don't, we wait. Those children then enter the first grade, and by the time they've reached the first grade, they've been read to on average 18 hours. Kids in more affluent communities, and I'm talking about the communities that are literally across the street, by the time they've reached the first grade, have been read to on average 1,000 hours. Kids from Stanley's community have heard 30 million fewer words by the time they've reached the first grade. And that gap in cognition, that gap in reading development, carries with it, you guessed it, early problems in school, early interactions with the juvenile justice system, the child welfare system, the adult justice system, and eventually prison. Those are little kids telling us, hey, if you put your resources down here, if you use your sword and your shield down here, if you just sit down and read to me for a little while down here, you might save me from going to prison, but we don't, we wait. Those children then go on to the next developmental phase in their life, and it's a really important one that we never talk about. It's when they transition from being expected to learn how to read to be expected to learn from reading. It's a really important period of time in our lives. It happens around 6, 7, or 8 years old. And oftentimes this is where we lose our young people. Because in that transition, if you haven't learned the ability to learn how to read, then it's very difficult to learn from reading. And that is the way that we are judged for the rest of our lives. The bar exam was nothing more than how well I could learn from reading. And because you are being judged in that way, not because you are black or brown or poor or somehow fundamentally inferior, but because you weren't given the tools in the first place, and you're being judged on how well you do at that. It frustrates kids. And because they are children, not because they are black or brown or poor or immigrants or stupid, because they are children, they do not have the language to articulate the frustration that they are feeling, and so it manifests in behavior. They start acting up, they start acting out, they run around in class, they're the class clown, they're the class problem. And what do we do as adults who are paid to keep them on the trajectory, to get them over these finish lines so that they can come and join us in the place of power, privilege, and opportunity that we all do? What do? Do we apologize to those kids? No. We blame them. We shame them. We name them. We punish them. We suspend and expel them. Kids are getting expelled and suspended in preschool these days. We're sending a message to those kids, but they get every single place that they go. You're a bad kid. You're a bad kid. You're a bad kid. That's what the good kids look like. Those are the grades that good kids get. This is what the good kids do. You're a bad kid. You're a bad kid. You're a bad kid. And they hear this message every single day on the way to school, at school, on the way home from school, and sadly, oftentimes in the homes that they're living in. Not because those parents are black or brown or poor or stupid or bad, but because they were never given the tools, because they are just grown-up versions of Stanley and these other children that I'm talking about. And they receive this message every single day until they enter the next developmental period of their life, which we love to call adolescence, the time when we are biologically engineered to decide who it is that we are going to be for the rest of our lives. We do that by taking data from the outside world, processing that, and then finding people who are just like us at the rejection of others, particularly authority. And we love it when the good kids do it. We celebrate it. We give them rewards and celebrations and graduations. We get them on the football team or the debate club or the dance troupe or the cheerleading squad or the theater team. But then there's this whole other group of kids that doesn't feel safe at school, not because they're not intelligent or ambitious or creative or driven or anything, but because they are afraid by the time they get to school because of the toxic stress that they are suffering. They are tired of the way that they get treated in school. They are tired of the way that they get judged in school, and so they leave. But they don't leave that biological need to be a part of a group or to understand who they are. And so they find those other kids who are just like them out on the street with all of this data that they've heard that they're bad kids. And we have a word for that too. We call it a gang. And when someone visits violence on that gang, and that young person responds with violence, not because they're black or brown or poor or bad or dumb, but because they've lived in violence since they were born and we did nothing about it. Because they live in neighborhoods that have been violated against for centuries and we've done nothing about it. Because they've been standing in the streets asking for people to recognize that their lives matter, and the only thing that we can give them is not all lives matter. When they respond with violence, that's when we as a society, that's when we as workers say, okay, young person, now I see you. Now you have my individual attention. And I will spend all of my time, all of my resources to find you, prosecute you, and lock you up for the rest of your life. Shame on you. In the state of Massachusetts, if an 18-year-old black boy kills another 18-year-old black boy, we as taxpayers and as prosecutors and as police and as citizens don't even blink an eye when we say that young man should go to prison for the rest of his life without the opportunity for parole because he committed a homicide. It'll cost us $11 million, but we'll show him a lesson. Instead of taking that $11 million and putting it somewhere else in the life cycle of that young person who has literally been telling us since he was born, I'm doomed unless you do something. That's our legacy right now. That is the decisions that we are making. Those are the decisions that we're confronted with in this moment, where the entire world is watching and asking, what are you going to do in this moment to move forward? And I'm asking you just to allow the possibility that there's something different and something better out there, even though it feels super uncomfortable to everything that we've learned. I have to ask you to allow yourself to do that, because on the other side of it is beauty. Because on the other side of it are things that we couldn't have even possibly imagined. Shortly before my meeting with Obama, I had a much more important meeting. I got to sit with a young man as he signed his letter of intent to play Division III baseball at a college in New Hampshire. A few months after that meeting, I got a text message from that young man who said, I did it, bro. I say, what'd you do, Stanley? Stanley, in one of his first pitching appearances in college baseball, threw the lights out and became named the pitcher and rookie of the week. He went on that year to pitch in the national championship game for his college, starting as a freshman. And they lost the national championship. The feeling that he had of being that guy on that day was better than any gang affiliation that he possibly could have had. And I have to tell you, after trying 50 cases to a verdict, there's nothing that replaces the feeling of Stanley sending me that text message and saying I did it. And it didn't stop there. Stanley texted me a short time later and he said, man, I think somebody's playing a trick on me. And I said, what do you mean, Stanley? Up until that point, Stanley had never received a letter that wasn't a warrant or a summons, but on this day, he opened a letter that was slid underneath his college dorm room door, and when he opened it, it said, congratulations, Stanley, you've made the honor roll. I said, what do you mean, Stanley? Why do you think somebody's playing a trick on you? And he said, bro, I've never seen C's in my report card, let alone A's or B's. I said, no, nobody's playing a trick on you, Stanley, you're winning. You're doing this. I said, what do you think the difference is? He said, I don't know, it's my environment. I wish that adults would spend more of their time helping young people do good things and instead of trying to catch them do bad things. Just another pearl of wisdom from Stanley Vargas. Last year, the Mass Bar Association recognized me. There was a really, really nice award, and in doing so, they asked me if I would find someone to announce me in receiving the award. But I asked John Legend, or could I ask Obama, or maybe Chappelle, or somebody like that. And I said, sure, I got someone for you. So I asked Stanley. And Stanley sat with me now, a junior in college, in front of 6,000 of my colleagues. And when he stood up in front of the podium, the first time that he's ever publicly spoke, he gave a 5-minute beautiful speech in which he told the crowd and he told me that he was decided that he wanted to go to law school because he wanted to be a prosecutor, because he thought he could do a better job than me. And I completely agree with him, because Stanley, the day he showed up in my courtroom, had way more experience that was necessary to the execution of justice, fairness, and safety than I ever did in all of my privilege. That is the opportunity that we have right now. That is the opportunity that this moment has given us. That is the opportunity that the secretary and all the wonderful teammates who put this together have given you. The moment to pause and ask ourselves, is there something better out there? Is there something that looks like progress? And we have to seize that opportunity. We have to seize this responsibility, because this is our legacy. In 50 years from now, people are going to be asking themselves what you did with your time while you were here. They're going to be looking at images of homogenous classrooms, of homogenous neighborhoods, of homogenous conferences and boardrooms. And they're going to be asking us, what the hell were you doing? How could you have let this happen? Number one in mass incarceration, number one in suicides, number one in racial disparities at every educational and health and economic metric you can possibly think of. What on earth were you doing? Why are you just standing there? I would have done something. Why didn't you do something? And when people are asking those questions of you 50 years from now, how do you want to be remembered? Because as Dr. Martin Luther King said, in the future, it's not the words of your enemies you remember, it's the silence of your friends. And so when people are asking those questions of you in 50 years from now, do you want to be remembered as someone in this moment who remains silent? Or do you want to be remembered as someone who saw this challenge in front of them and held both truths? That all of us show up to this work to do a good job, but we haven't been given the proper tools or training or technology to do it in the way that we should, to honor the oaths that we take. Do you want to be remembered as someone who reached out in the life of a young person? You're not going to get them all, but just reach out in the life of one young person and took that moment to pause and listen. Do you want to be remembered as someone who gave voice to the voiceless, power to the powerless? Do you want to be someone who was remembered when the time got tough, you pulled out your sword and your shield and you stood courageously? Do you want to be remembered as someone who is one of the new civil rights leaders of our time? I guarantee you, if you choose the latter today, if you choose to join my gang, wherever you are in 50 years from now, you'll be remembered as one of the happiest, wealthiest people that's ever lived. Thank you very much.
All right, Adam, thank you very much. I do have some questions from the audience for you.
Would love
And
that.
just a reminder to everyone out there, if we don't get to your question today, it will be answered during our podcast, The Race for a Change with LaTanya Taylor. So look out for more information on that. One of the questions we got, Adam, was many of our children have unresolved trauma that began in gestation and continues nearly on a daily basis. What do you suggest we do to assist them to heal?
Sure. Love that question. I can already tell that people are like level 300 for this talk. There are folks who don't understand that like trauma is a lot of the behavior that we see in young people is the manifestation of unresolved trauma. And so I really love the question. Two things. One, we should not, I'm not asking you to become all of the things. Social worker, therapist, parent, teacher, like I understand that we are here to do a job. But when we take that job, we swear an oath. And part of that oath is like, we're not going to do any more harm than is already being done. And so understand that the way that you interact with that young person when they show up in front of you can either ameliorate or exacerbate that trauma. And so dive into being as trauma informed as possible and understand literally how you're standing in court, how you're addressing someone in court, how you are treating that young person can exacerbate or ameliorate the trauma, but it can also create a relationship that kid has never had and made them much more likely to do the things that you're asking them to do. The second thing is understand that victims of crime, particularly Black men and boys, do not access services when they are victimized. Part of that is because of their distrust of the system. Part of that is just because of all the barricades that poverty puts up in front of people. But a large part of that is just because of a lack of sort of like knowing that these things exist and having access to them and having someone who is culturally competent enough to realize that just because they know it exists doesn't mean that they're going to sign up and go all of the time. And so understanding in your jurisdictions where sort of those service providers are, which ones are the most trauma informed, and recognizing that your case, whether it's a victim and defendant or a victim and lots of defendants, there are universes of people around them that need you too. And so if you see a person who you're prosecuting or who is your victim that has children around them, have a conversation with the parents, have a conversation with the neighbors, and just ask them like, hey, we have a victim witness advocate who I would love to sit down with you and talk to you about services for these young people. Or even better, know where those services are and have a conversation with them in real time.
Awesome. Thank you, Adam.
Sure.
Another question we received was, as a law enforcement officer, we only have so much discretion. How do we give opportunities to juveniles who break the law when a law enforcement officer is held accountable by their agency?
Sure. So that is a wonderful question and a tension I really, really understand and sympathize with and empathize with. And so this will not be the perfect answer because I don't know the culture of that institution. But for me, giving a kid an opportunity does not mean not enforcing the law. What I hear when I hear some of the popular hashtags that are going around about the police is not like we need to get rid of law enforcement or law enforcement needs to stop being involved in the lives of young people. We're saying give people the equipment to allow them to make decisions like that aren't so binary as nothing happens to you or we lock you up. Part of that is just being trauma informed and recognize that like a conversation with a law enforcement officer can really make the difference if you know how to engage with that young person specifically because of the trauma around law enforcement they're coming into that conversation with. But it also means that there are developmentally appropriate ways to get actual accountability from that kid that should make the bosses happy. And really like engage in restorative practice. Look for the people. We have this jarring feeling about the words restorative justice, but having practiced it as a prosecutor was one of the times that I felt most like a prosecutor because the young person is talking about the thing that they've done. They're saying the words out loud. They are getting to hear what the harm has caused. And to me, that was accountability. And then you actually see them doing things once they've understood the harm to repair it. And that's like what we do on probation. But in this way, it is much more effective. You have much more sort of oversight and vested interest in it. And you're still getting the same result, which is kids who ultimately don't come back. And Stanley, while at the time I made the decision, my boss was going crazy, I would look back at my boss or any prosecutor who thinks that I made a wrong decision and ask them if we're safer with Stanley being now a senior in college about to graduate with the prospects of a job or law school, or someone who's in the 9th year of a 10, 15, 20-year bid in state prison. So I hope that's helpful. I understand that we don't have a lot of time, so I'm sorry for the incompleteness of a really deep question and answer.
All right, so it looks like we have time for one more question, Adam. I have someone here that kind of goes along with what you just said. What I hear you describing really resonates with my sense of restorative justice. Is that a movement you advocate?
For sure, and here's why. And this is like a lot of people think that restorative justice is somehow like in lieu of process, that it somehow is a pass. And two things happen in restorative practice. One is that you actually see this like accountability happening. You actually see this person saying the words, and we're not doing the thing which we do in the criminal justice system is don't say anything. You're innocent until proven guilty. You sit over there and we're going to defend you. They are forced to deal with this in a way that is safe for them to do so. But the other thing, and this is where people sort of like, this is where we lose people with restorative justice, is the victims had the opportunity to address Stanley. And one of them was super mad. Like there was no getting him back. He was pissed off that he viewed Stanley as getting leniency, when I have to tell you that Stanley begged me to send him to jail because the accountability that he had to show was hard. It was harder than him going to DYS and lifting weights. But the other victim had the opportunity to see Stanley flourish. And while he was hurt when Stanley stole his motorcycle, he was happy to receive it back. It relieved him of the need to come back to court 20 times from his neighborhood that was outside of our city. And he got to see that in the end, Stanley was very accountable for the harm that he caused. And he is again about to become a lovely and productive member of society. We know that because Stanley is a senior in college, the likelihood he ever commits another crime is significantly reduced. Well, the likelihood that his children that he does not have yet ever enter the criminal justice system is severely reduced. The likelihood that he can actually access capital that will pull him and his family out of intergenerational poverty is increased. And so all of these outcomes are the things that we're shooting for, that started with a moment where it's just like, I'm going to do something that's scary, but this is the outcome. This is the bigger win.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Adam. And we're looking forward to hearing more from you in our podcast later on.
I'm really looking forward to it. I don't have chat function access, but my name is Adam my email address is adam@prosecutors.impact.com. My organization works deeply with prosecutors' offices all over the country. My social media is Adam John Foss, at Adam John Foss. Please reach out to me. If you have a question that you didn't get to ask, I'll be on the podcast later, but please reach out. I love hearing from you, and we're here to support you.
Awesome. Thank you, Adam. And
Thank you.
just a note to everyone, as we end today's session, I'd like to share some information for all of our circuit team members. The Race Impact course registration begins today, so look out for an email later on from the Justice Reform team. The first 200 slots will be available today, and more slots will be made available next week if you didn't get the opportunity to register this time around. And just keep in mind that you'll be discussing some of the same things that Adam went over with us today in your circuit team meetings. We hope that you'll join us for session 2 on July 1st, How Implicit Bias Rules, with Omar Bowler and Dr. Ira Thomas. Thank you all and have a wonderful day.